And what is the company you work for?
I work for KP Companies and Interaction Traction. They are partnership companies, executive search on one side, specializing in diversity, in business for about 17 years, and the training and multicultural engagement side, strategic side, is Interaction Traction.
Okay. What's your relationship with the park?
I am a consultant for the park board. We work on not only diversity recruitment efforts, but also strategic engagement efforts and implicit bias training.
Okay. Were you surprised by any questions tonight?
No, I think they were all good questions, very fair questions.
Okay. Is this the kind of participation you've seen on park issues?
It is. And sadly, you know, we're here talking about equity, and yet, as you can see, very few people of color in the room. And we've got to get more communities involved, more community members that don't look the same involved in these kinds of conversations. And I think the park board is making efforts to do that and getting better and better every day. They have a ton of initiatives towards that end, and then our work is to make sure that we can be a strategic voice as well to help them in those efforts.
I'm an organizer on the Parks and Power campaign. Parks and Power is a citywide initiative organizing for racial justice in and through the Minneapolis parks through Hope Community.
Okay, I said Parks Board, I meant with the parks.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Okay, now how have you been doing?
We've been doing really well, you know, this is long-term work. We've had a really strong year. We're hosting some forums right now so folks can assess the candidates, but more importantly, talk about our issues and our visions for the park board. So we're building momentum. We're connecting with people across the city. So I feel real good.
The park board that owns the land?
The park board owns the land. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Largest landholder in the city. $100 million of taxpayer money the park board allocates per year. It's a huge powerhouse.
How many people use park services?
Tons, millions. I don't even know.
I don't remember that number or something.
Me neither. I don't know the exact number, but millions.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's quite a range of properties.
Huge. Yeah, definitely.
We got golf courses and little tiny parks.
Regional parks. All that prime waterfront. One thing to pay attention to is the Upper Harbor Terminal Development Project. It's the last riverfront development project left in Minneapolis. It's north side between Lowry Avenue and Dowling Avenue on the north side of the river. There's going to be housing, business, entertainment. So we're really paying attention to that as far as how do Northsiders and Northeasters benefit from that. It's a parkland. Yep, it's parkland. The park's one of the main developers of the project. So it's a public project. It's going to be parkland and private development on the same site. Yep.
How long have you been doing this?
Oh man, I've been at it for like almost 10 years, I think. Yeah, I got involved in 2009. Making huge progress. We got a lot more people involved. We have some really race-conscious policy being passed at the park board level. The racial equity metrics in the Neighborhood Park 2020 plan are really positive. So there's definitely progress being made. It's about, we can't stop after this election season. Everybody's paying attention now that the park board's up for election, but it's the next 4 years that are going to decide it. So we want to get more people involved. And beyond just public policy, but how are we creating the parks that we want to see? How do we make sure that immigrants and refugees are safe in our parks? How do we make sure that young people are safe in our parks, that they're not being criminalized and arrested? You know, these are the bigger issues. It's not just about public policy, but how is Minneapolis, what type of city are we? And what are we going to allow and what are we going to stand for?
And welcome to the League of Women Voters Minneapolis 2017-18 Civic Buzz Series. My name is Joelle and I'll be leading this evening's meeting on equity in our Minneapolis parks. These monthly Civic Buzz meetings are free and open to the public, but organized and run by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. Issues discussed here have been brought forward by our members as topics that need further study. Civic Buzz is followed by small discussion groups held throughout the month in members' homes, where we delve deeper into the issues. We have a few of our discussion guides available here as examples for non-members to see where we go from here. If you're interested in becoming a member, talk to Pam Talene, who's in the back row there, raising her hand. or you can pick up a membership brochure at the table. The Whittier Alliance continues to sponsor the Civic Buzz by advertising these programs through their network. Bill is here from the Uptake, videotaping this evening. He'll be putting this meeting up on the Uptake site, and we will link it to our website. Many thanks to Bill for taping tonight. Video ensures that more people will have a chance to become informed, and hopefully it will lead to even more in-depth discussion of this issue. Tonight we have 2 speakers, followed by questions from the audience, and then some time for audience discussion. We find that your questions always bring out more information, but directed to your interest. With that in mind, the speakers will finish by about 6:45. They'll each be speaking about 10 to 15 minutes, so we have enough time for your questions. We'll officially end the meeting at 7:30. However, we encourage you to stay and continue discussion if you wish. Because equity in parks is an issue in this political season, we've invited candidates who are running for city offices. It's a busy time for them, and they've made the effort. So if you are a candidate, will you please stand? If you're here when the meeting ends, just a minute, stay standing, I'm not done. If you're here when the meeting ends at 7:30, that's when people would have time to ask you where you are on the issues. But for now, I'd just like you to stand, say your name, and what office you're running for.
Latricia Vital, and I'm running for Minneapolis Park Board at Large.
I'm Russ Henry, and I'm also running for Minneapolis Park Board at Large.
Bob Schlosser, running for District 6.
Sorry, my name is Tom Nordike. I am running for the 4th District on the Park Board. I've previously served on the Park Board as president for a while, and I have to apologize. I'm having dinner with my mother in about a half hour, so I have to leave early. That I'm not going to be late for.
I'm Carol Becker, and I'm the mother, and I have to feed her dinner. I'm running for the Board of Estimate, by the way.
I'm Bill Schreier. I'm running for the Park Board in District 5.
I'm Meg Torney, and I'm running for re-election for Park Board at Large.
All right, thank you. The League of Women Voters of Minneapolis has teamed up with the Minneapolis Parks Foundation, the Minneapolis Riverfront Partnership, and Trust for Public Land to send a questionnaire to all of the Park Board candidates. And they'll be posting the questionnaire on the LWV Minneapolis website. We're at the point where the responses have been obtained, and we'll have them posted by the end of the week. We encourage others to post a link from their websites to our Facebook pages as well. We're hopeful that this will provide a lot of people with information about some important current issues. We'll be sending out a notice about it soon. Meanwhile, you can always check our homepage, www.lwvminneapolis.mpls.org, to see if the results have been released yet. Okay, our speakers tonight are Joelle Allen and Jake Virden, and they're both deeply involved in equity in Minneapolis parks. Joelle Allen is a multicultural engagement strategist and trainer. She works with organizations like the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board to help them recognize how implicit and systemic bias disenfranchises employees, customers, and communities, and more importantly, what to do about it. Strategies include creating tools for equitable hiring practices, inclusive communication, and understanding implicit bias and microaggressions. Her background includes an MBA from St. Thomas, diversity training, marketing, and event planning. She's Director of Client Management, Client Engagement and Marketing, and Executive Recruiter at KP Companies. Jake Virden is lead organizer of Parks and Power campaign. Parks and Power is a citywide initiative rooted at Hope Community, organizing for racial justice in Minneapolis parks. Jake is a writer, performance artist, and educator focused on the intersections of race, class, culture, and ecology. Jake has worked as a facilitator with SPEAC, which is Sustainable Progress Engaging Active Citizens, and facilitates trainings on racial justice and European American resistance to white supremacy. He's an artist, activist, organizer, community builder, musician, educator, poet, and political activist. We're happy you're both here tonight. Our topic is equity in our Minneapolis parks. Joelle has worked directly with the parks to help them recognize inequities and work towards equity. Jake is working with people who feel change has not come or perhaps is not coming fast enough. We need to see this issue from both sides, and hopefully tonight is our chance. We'll start with Jake, and then he will be followed by Joelle. Welcome.
Good evening. How are you doing tonight? I just want to start and say thank you to the League of Women Voters. I think in these dire times, spaces like this where we can come together and really dig into the issues and we can get away from the TV screen and the Twitter and really get together, I'm so appreciative for. I feel like this is where our sanity is going to be saved. And I'm honored to be here with an organization like the League of Women Voters. In my organizing work, women are always the most brave and the most wise and the most courageous and really get the least recognition. So could we give a round of applause to the League of Women Voters? The next thing I want to do is acknowledge where we stand today. We stand on Dakota land. This is land that was stolen from the Dakota people. And that's a hard fact to wrestle with, but one that we cannot let go of. And it's fundamental to this conversation about racial justice and the Minneapolis Parks. The Minneapolis Parks is the largest landholder in the city. Who had that land and how did they get that land? That's a question to ask. The other thing I want to do is acknowledge the folks who came before me who worked on racial justice in the parks. Like it was said, Parks and Power is now citywide. We grew out of a really local effort to address specific concerns at PV Park. It was a group of young organizers. That's the SPEAK program. The first group did listening sessions with young people in the neighborhood, and everything came back to like, wow, the park could play such a big role in the problems that we're experiencing: violence, lack of engagement, lack of opportunity, lack of employment. So there was an effort to educate ourselves on what was happening at the park and what happened with PV Park. And we realized there was a promise made by the park board. This was in 2009 that we were doing this research to invest a lot of capital into PV Park that just never happened. So that sent us on this pathway to organizing in the parks. And before that, at PV Park, everybody's familiar with PV Park in here? Can I get a show of hands? Right there on the corner of Chicago and Franklin. It used to be a liquor store right there in that corner. And it was a group of folks, maybe folks in this room, I don't know, people of Phillips, who were organizing for a long time around cleaning up that corner. So I am a humble recipient of this work and stand on a lot of shoulders. So I'm gonna keep my comments pretty brief because I'm really interested in the dialogue we could have tonight, but I have to acknowledge those folks who came before me. I also have to say I came into this work because I'm from Northeast Minneapolis. I was raised at Bottineau Park primarily, around a lot of working class, old-fashioned, in-your-face racism. And it was the parks where we learned how to, my generation was the first generation that was integrated in Northeast Minneapolis, right? So my father's generation, black people weren't allowed in Northeast Minneapolis, and it was violently enforced. So the parks is where we learned how to love each other, you know, and we learned how to get past that. My generation was the first to experience that in Northeast, so that's really what brings me to this work. So, what is our work? Parks and Power is about working for racial and economic justice in and through the Minneapolis parks. And that's very important. In means the Minneapolis Park Board is a policy arena. The Minneapolis Park Board is the largest property holder in the city and has inherited the dynamics of white supremacy, right? So our job is to catalyze and stimulate organizing so people can participate in those politics, have a say in the policy that matters, right? And we've seen good examples of that coming to fruition. The Neighborhood Park 2020 plan that has specific racial equity metrics for investing capital. That's an example, I think, of very good public policy. So that's working for racial justice in the Minneapolis parks. I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. The other part is through the Minneapolis parks. So beyond policy, the parks is where we gather, it's where we exist, it's where we live. So it's not just organizing through public policy, it's popular education in the parks. It's doing things, working with youth in the parks. It's not just in the parks. And that's a point I wanted to make tonight, is that you can't talk about racial equity in the parks without talking about racial equity in our broader society. To think white supremacy is an all-pervasive system. So to think that the parks could achieve racial equity in isolation is a naive thought, right? You can't do that. A good example is that I was reading some history, and I'll share this article with folks afterwards. It's called Mapping Prejudice. Has anybody heard of this Mapping Prejudice project? So what they've done is they've uncovered housing covenants that were saying white only. You couldn't sell this property to a person of color. Where were those housing covenants most densely packed? Around Minneapolis Park Board property. And that has to do with property values and the way property values are determined in this society. So what we recognize is people are still dealing with issues of housing, people are dealing with issues of employment, people are dealing with issues of education, and we want to use the parks, the parks are already this in a lot of ways, but to continue to support organizing like that inside the Minneapolis park. So we pay attention to the park board's policies, and we also pay attention to the parks and the people in the park, and that's very important to us. We work with culture as our tool. We believe in storytelling. We host concerts. I'm an artist. Most of my fellow organizers are artists. So I'm just trying to give you a flavor of who we are. So what we do is we look for where there's energy in the Minneapolis parks, where people are already raising these issues, and we help to network people. So we network people in the Phillips neighborhood with people in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, with people over north, with people northeast, so we can start to talk about our common problems. And then we support their organizing, whether that means helping people mobilize, if it means providing some racial equity training, if it means helping people plug into the CAC processes with the park board. We really see ourselves as a catalyst and as a support of people already doing organizing work. Our job is to build an infrastructure for sustained participation at the park board. That's hard for working class people. My father was a baseball coach in the park board, and I don't think he knew that there was an elected park board. I guarantee he wasn't informed about the candidates, right? This is a real life reality for a lot of people, and you compound race on top of that. I'm a privileged man, so if you think about all the stresses that come with living in a white supremacist society, we have to support people to participate in the processes. Okay, am I doing all right on time? A couple more minutes? I wanted to share something that came out of one of the processes we had with leaders in the parks. We had a series called Politics is Local. So the whole idea is help people understand that there is a such thing as a 9-person elected body that decides what to do with $100 million a year. Talk about the history of how we got to be where we are in Minneapolis. How did our families, a lot of European American folks in the room tonight, how did our families come to this land and who was on the land first? We had a weekend to discuss these topics.
Yep. Yeah, it's free assistance.
And one of the things we talked about was racial equity. It's a buzzword now. Everybody's talking about equity. So we read a definition that we got from a national training group that read like this. Racial equity is the proactive reinforcement of policies, practice, attitudes, and actions that produce equitable power, opportunity, treatment, impacts, and outcomes across race as a key indicator of racial justice and equity. That was the definition we were given. We talked with folks about that and asked them what they thought that meant, what was missing, what we should add, what do those words really mean, how do you define the word with the word equity, is equity, what is equity? And this is what this group of Minneapolis residents, neighbors, came up with as our community definition of racial equity. Racial equity exists when there is no disparity in wealth and power between communities of color and European descendants. When the dignity of every human being is respected and promoted. Racial equity requires recognition of communities of color and the false ideology of white supremacy, redistribution of wealth and power as reparations for slavery, genocide, and exploitation, as well as a process of reconciliation in order to allow for healing from our violent history. Indigenous sovereignty, locally and globally, is foundational to racial justice. That's powerful. And I think why I wanted to share that tonight is because this isn't a short-term problem. We're really in this for the long haul, no matter who gets elected. And it's these deep questions in the culture. That's why I think Bottineau is so important. Really think about who was John C. Calhoun and what did he represent and how did he get there? You know, and our work is to do that deeper work. The park board can do so much. And the other thing I wanted to say, and I'll transition towards my exit, is that no matter who's elected to the park board, if we don't show up, it doesn't really matter. So it's sustained participation, So I wanted to give you some opportunities to participate or give you a sense of what we got going on. We're right in the midst of our forum season. I left these forums on the table, these flyers, Thursday, October 5th, this Thursday from 6 to 8 at Martin Luther King Park. We're partnering with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Council, who has been doing great work for years. We, walk in their footsteps also to host a candidate forum for Districts 5 and 6. That's pretty much the whole south side, south of 36, 38. So it might impact people in this room. And then October 20th is our culminating citywide at-large candidate forum, and that's going to be at the MIA on October 20th. That's a Friday. We'd love to have people come out. After that, October 17th, the Bottineau movement to remove Calhoun from the lake and restore the original name, it has to go to the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners, and they're having their first hearing on October 17th from 6 to 8. We'll be promoting that also. And then kind of what's moving for us right now is massive investment in recreation. That's foundational to racial equity. You gotta, now that there's capital investment, and we all know what's happening in Minneapolis right now, a lot of property speculation, the rents are rising. So if we don't invest in recreation and the people in those neighborhoods, we just fought for something that we're not gonna be able to, as far as working class people and people of color are not gonna be able to appreciate. So we're gonna be making a push to really increase the recreation budget. We're continuing to follow up on the Bottineau issue. We're interested in having a more thorough dialogue around the police body cameras. Body cameras for police have been presented as a tool for accountability, but we have serious concerns about what it means for surveillance in our communities. Has it really produced equitable results? And what does it mean for the park board, who already, I know that we could get into the details of the budget, but the way information has been presented to us, the Minneapolis Park Board spends more money on policing than it does on youth development. So if you're thinking about making a massive investment into buying body cameras, is that really the solution? And the community engagement hasn't been adequate. So that's an issue we're going to be talking about. We're talking a lot about soccer these days, yes, and how to make space for soccer fields. And we would love to build with folks in this room, come out, get involved. It's a movement for everybody in every neighborhood of the city. We all have a role to play. Thank you so much for inviting me out, and that's my time.
Yeah. Where's the mic?
Hello. Oh, you guys got to do better than that. Hello. All right. Thank you. It is certainly my sincere pleasure to be here as well. I would also like to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me here tonight, and to Jake for such a passionate speech. I agree wholeheartedly, and certainly to you for being here tonight, because I think these are really important issues that we need to be present for. No matter where you fall
on the political spectrum, one thing that is loud and clear from what we have going on in our country right now is that voting matters. Showing up matters. We are the ones that have a responsibility to create the world that we want to live in. And so that starts here tonight. It starts at home, it starts in our communities, it starts in our cities, states, and countries. So I want to plant that seed that those are the types of things that we're talking about tonight. The other part of that, and I know we have several candidates here, so I think it's really important too that we make sure that we are voting people in that have our best interests in mind. You know, Jake mentioned that diversity and inclusion is the buzzword, and I agree. It's the buzzword, but guess what? This is my passion. I have been a black woman my entire life. This is not a buzzword. Okay? So this is something that is every day that we have to think about. And I don't want someone in office who leverages the fact that diversity and inclusion is the in thing right now as a platform and then doesn't do anything about it later, okay? And I'm not just talking to white people, I'm talking to all people because this is critical that we all have to work together to make this happen, right? Diversity is all of us. If we look at the broader sense of diversity, there's no one in this room that's not included. So we need to make sure that that continues to happen. All right, let me stop preaching. We do a lot of work with different organizations, and as we do that work, and I promise I'll get around to the park board, as we do that work, we try to kind of assess the health of organizations as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And there are a lot of criteria that go into that, but when it comes down to it, there are three main criteria that we can kind of count on that give us a good gauge of whether or not they're on the right track, okay? So the first is their hiring practices, right? Who are they hiring? The folks that they're hiring, what are they doing? Does the organization look completely homogeneous, right? What does gender diversity look like? What does their LGBTQIA representation look like, right? What does their ethnicity look like in terms of how that works? So there are a lot of factors in that. The second thing that we look at is how they're treating people, right? Not only internally, right, their employee base, that becomes important, but also externally. How are they interfacing with the communities that they serve? And then finally, how are they allocating resources? And what we know is that organizations that put their money where their mouth is, as it relates to inclusion, are far more successful than those who do not. So I'm going to take a look at those three criteria because we only have 10 to 15 minutes together. All right. So, you know, I always get ahead of myself, and that's okay. So first, let me kind of put things in context. The park board has 251 park properties, all right? It accounts for 6,804 acres of land, which is roughly 17% of the land in Minneapolis. Jake alluded to the fact that they're the largest landholder. There are 23 million annual visits. If you don't think that there's diversity in that 23 million, right, then we have to have a different conversation. There are 55 miles of parkway, 49 full-service recreation centers, and 350 special events each year. So this gives you just a glimpse of the massive size and complexity of an organization like this. How many people have kids in this room? Wonderful. So how many people have told their kids that they need them to do something and they do it right away every time? They understand the directions, they immediately go to do it, right? It doesn't happen often. I have a 21-year-old, I'm still waiting for that to happen. Okay, and so what I'm saying is that when you have this huge organization, you also have to allow time for things to percolate, right? For ideas to start with the leadership and flow down through the organization, and it will. Now, it doesn't just trickle down. I don't know who came up with that. It has to be driven down through programs, and it takes an effort of everyone. I love the work that Jake is doing. This kind of thing is important because that has to happen at the ground level. And then we're doing really cool work at the corporate level to make sure that the systems support this kind of change, right? So it takes us both. So while it's the responsibility of the park board superintendent to manage the day-to-day operations, the elected park board has oversight of the acquisition, development, maintenance, and programming as a whole. So, as I said, we want candidates who are going to come in and take this task seriously and figure out how we do those things in a way that's equitable. So let me start with hiring practices. Those are the 3 criteria that we talked about. So when we start to look with a company, work with a company, we do a lot of upfront research, and we work with specific groups within the organization. We talk to people at all levels of the organization to see what the real deal is, right? I mean, it's great that, go to the website and we do this and this and this, but where you really find out the stuff, right, is when you get in a room one-on-one with people and you figure out what's going on. And we found out a couple of things. Now, keep in mind there had been a culture and climate survey that had come out a year or 2 earlier. And so we were certainly aware of that. But we found that, number one, the culture and climate survey said that people of color were being marginalized as a whole. And what we found is that that was not true across the organization. Now, that does not mean that nothing happens, but that wasn't widespread, okay? The other thing that we found out is that the park board had really undergone a shift from an organization that really had remained pretty stable since its inception to a metrics-based organization. And that kind of change is really difficult for anyone. So they started to put systems and processes in place for high performance that, quite frankly, is a little tough of a shift. Now, while it's a tough shift, metrics are wonderful in laying the groundwork for diversity and inclusion. Because now it's no longer a subjective, well, you don't really fit with the culture and all these little things that you hear. Now it is, you got a 9 out of 10, you go. You got a 4 out of 10, you go, right? And so those things become really important. The other thing is that with there was a small but very vocal cohort of people who were really unhappy. And then we have to start to ferret out, what is it? Is it personal? Is it racial? Is it about equity? Is it about, all of these things? Is it general mistreatment? And go there. And what we found is that, some of these things predated our thing by, a decade or so. But for the most part, the culture was taking the right trend upwards towards better equity, all right? Now, again, I'm not saying that no racism or implicit bias, that it does not exist, because it does. Sadly, in this country, our historical makeup is such that that's a constant companion for us. But what I will say is that people are starting to take note, and they are starting to work to try to undo it. And for the first time, from what I'm hearing, people started to feel comfortable asking the questions, hey, if I say this, is that considered bad? right? And that's what we want. When we have allies, we have to be open with each other. We have to give each other room to have dialogue. We have to give each other permission to get it wrong. And then we have to, in love, go to that person and say, sister girl, I know that you did not mean what you said. So let me give you a better tool for figuring it out, right? And truly doing it in love and moving on from it. And we started to see some of that. Now, do we have a long way to go? Yes, we do, but that's okay. The roles are changing. So our first search, and our company does executive search on one side of the business, and we specialize in diversity search. And then on the other side of the business, we do multicultural engagement, and we do training, and that includes implicit bias and some different things. And so the first search with the park board was an HR director. And we knew that not only should we be looking for a diverse slate of candidates, but we had to have someone who had diversity of thought, who had, experience working with different types of communities at all levels, who had experience working in government entities and all kinds of different things. And again, this is not someone who says the right thing. This is being able to check into their background and know that they've done the work, right? So that's where we started. We have a dynamic HR director over there, and we've already seen that the perception from employees has started to change. And again, we aren't there yet. But man, is it a big difference from when we started doing those focus groups before the HR director, and over a year later going in and talking to those same people who are like, yeah, I see it. I think we're gonna do this, right? So I think that's important. How am I doing on time?
About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes, okay, we're gonna wrap this up. All right, so the second thing we look at is how is the organization treating people? And in treating people, what I want to know is not only is it in the normal sense that people feel included when they come to work, but also from a corporate sense, do they have the tools that they need to do their jobs? And do they feel that if they want to move throughout the organization in a positive way, that they are supported in doing so? And 10 years ago, I don't think that you could necessarily make that claim. That's not the same today. And so we're starting to see those changes. And keep in mind, this means they have positive movement in how they would like to move. It's not always up and down, right? If they want to get other experiences, they can do that. I'm going to skip some of this just for the sake of time. But we did look at some data as it relates to positive job movement, and we found that there was quite a shift in diversity. So across 6 of the 8 EEO4 categories, there was an overall increase in workforce diversity by about 5% from 2011 to 2016. So to put this in context, if we look at other large organizations, the park board is on par with that in terms of that increase. And this is across 6 different job categories, including officials and administration, technicians, protected service workers, paraprofessionals, administrative support, and service maintenance workers. And keep in mind that we're trying to look for diversity spread throughout every level, right? We don't want everything at the bottom. We don't want any tokenism. We don't want any of that. We want to see diversity throughout the organization, because we know that when all perspectives are represented, all perspectives get represented. And so we're starting to see that. With that said, the complexion of the US is changing rapidly, and most companies are not prepared for it. And so there's more work to do. And we're going to have to pick up the pace in getting that done, but we've laid a groundwork that starts to work. In terms of the external audiences, some of the work we've done is with their communications department, in making sure that now as you look at the website, now as you look at flyers, you'll start to see a change in terms of who's represented. right? And we want to see black and brown faces along with white faces on all of the collateral that we put out. And it's not a token one here and there. It's not images that project poverty and all of the stereotypes that go along with being black and brown. It is black and brown faces that are representative of the community and the economic level of the community that they are trying to promote. And this becomes really important. And so they are starting to make that shift. I want to make a quick comment about the police force as well, because Jake's comment was that we spend more, the park board spends more on recreation, or more on policing than recreation. But I want to just put a little twist on that, because while there's policing, number one, you are safer in a park than you are across the street from the park. So that's the first thing, and safety is huge. Number two, the police don't just police. The park board does 350 events a year. And during those events, that force is there to help people, to provide safety, to do all kinds of things. And so they really participate in the recreation process. So it is all, kind of part of that thing. In terms of communities, I also think that you start to see in these communities more multiculturalism and a shift in perspective. Think about the change from Calhoun to Bide-Makaska, and the fact that the park board vocally supported this. Would that have happened 10 years ago? 15 years ago? Absolutely not. And the fact that they are starting to engage communities and get people as part of that process, again, is a sign that we're going the right direction. Finally, because I know that my time is about up, I'll talk just briefly about allocating resources. So we want to find that organizations, not only do they run efficiently, right, as we look at them compared to other organizations, but that they are allocating their resources in a way that is evidence that they have a true commitment to diversity, right? Again, do they put their money where their mouth is? And so the park board is very efficient. When we look at companies across industries, there's roughly 10% management to employees, okay? So that they're in line, and the park board's actually about 9.2. So are they spending effectively to begin with is the baseline, right? And then are they spending on equity? So the park board is actually the first system that has developed a criteria-based system for capital and rehabilitation projects in the entire nation, right? So it's the first American park agency to require by ordinance that its capital improvement plan uses specific, transparent, and data-driven measures to ensure racial and economic equity as it relates to their funding allocations. And as a result, as we go forward, 33 of the first 34 parks slated for improvements as part of this 20-year plan are located in racially concentrated and areas of poverty. And that is putting your money where your mouth is. So in closing, I do want to leave time for Q&A. I do encourage you to look at the links that Civic Buzz put out. I encourage you to go to the park board website and look at some of the equity initiatives. And then more than that, I encourage you to be part of the change taking place. Everybody in here, we are all allies for doing something amazing. We need heroes. We all want to be the heroes. And right now, more than ever, we need heroes in every shade. Thank you.
Thank you. This is great. I want both of you up here in a moment to answer questions. And what I think we'll do is if you both can stand up here, share this one mic that we have, And just field questions from the audience, and if you could maybe repeat the question so everyone can hear it, if you can hear it. So you folks out there will have to say it loudly enough too. And I just want to, she referred to some links that we had. We have, I mentioned that that leaguers will now be studying this further, this topic, and we'll meet in small groups and homes and discuss it more. And when we do that, we have what we call a discussion guide and some information that's given to our members to study so that they can discuss things be more knowledgeable in discussing it. And we have put that discussion guide, and we have a list of links that go with that discussion guide. We've put them on our website. So if you go to our website and go to the Civic Buzz for this month, you will find the discussion guide and the links, and it's some really good information. So I recommend you doing that. And I will get off the stage now, and you can come back up and we'll get your questions, okay? I can, who's got the first one? I'll take the, okay, Margaret.
Jake made reference to the CACs, and I don't think anybody knows what those are.
Okay, so the question was CACs.
Nobody, but
Right, no, Community Advisory Committee. So when the park board makes official policy, for example, the area master plans, which are determining what the infrastructure changes at each park will be, where there'll be a basketball court, where there'll be whatever, a CAC is formed, a CAC, a Community Advisory Committee, and these are appointed by commissioners, and depending on what the CAC is addressing, there might be an appointment from a city council member or other folks there. It's an appointed body that will meet to make official recommendations to the board to approve a certain plan. That is a CAC. Does that make sense?
yes.
Okay.
Anything on cats?
No, I think you covered it. That's good. Yes.
You know, I have a question since both of you are there. My name is Sean Fitzgerald, lifelong Minneapolis, and I'm part of Park Watch and also Play It Safe Minneapolis, a dynamic group that's on Facebook. I was part of 8 years ago of getting the Citizen Advisory Commission passed. And it's 8 years later and the park board is looking at revising it. And one thing I didn't think about, or that we didn't think about then, was the process by which the citizens are appointed to the CAC. And unlike the city, the park board does not have an open appointments process where people who want to serve can apply. Instead, it is very political. The people are appointed. There's a CAC for the golf course in Hiawatha. It's like 6 neighborhood groups and a bunch of commissioners and the Hennepin County board representative and 2 council members. And you end up with people who don't even live in the community, and you end up with people who, I live in the donut hole in the old hippie neighborhood of Powderhorn, and from 42nd to Franklin, we have no representation on regional park CACs. We're just left out. Would an open appointment process, what works well for inclusion on citizen, to get people at the table, not just talking at a meeting like I'm doing now, but at the table, decision makers?
So it's multifaceted. And I do think that these types of processes, they're iterative, right? So we need to continually improve. One of the things I say all the time to people, because they always look at me and, we can't find any qualified people of color. And, you know, the snarky part of Joelle says, okay, there's about, 1 million people in the area and you can't find one single person of color. But besides that, the other part of Joelle says, the truth is that you can't promote golf in a hunting magazine. And what we don't do is we don't go, think about that, right? You have to promote and advertise to the people who are most impacted by whatever it is you're doing. And that's where organizations fall down. And so
that is also where we've done a lot of work with the park board in terms of let's improve where we go to get the word out. And they, you know, have taken off, and you're starting to see some changes in terms of where you see. So I think there's still room for improvement, and there always will be. But I also know that they have open time at every meeting, and they always invite everyone in the community to come forward and be a part of all kinds of advisory councils. And so I would really encourage you to be a part of making that happen and helping them make sure that the process is more representative.
I just want to say a few things about CACs, and I appreciate you doing the work to create them. I think it's a great question. I think the park board has been responsive, and there has been some extending of appointment power to other types of organizations. Like I know NOC has had some appointment power juxtaposition. We've actually appointed some folks and had folks on the CAC. What we've also done is organized inside these community advisory committees to get things like childcare and some dinner provided. So now if you go to the RecQuest CAC or the Area Master Plan CACs, you can get a hot meal, and if you need to, somebody can watch your kids. Because again, you know, if you don't have the money, if you're a single parent, you got your kids, it's hard to participate. So it's something that we're tracking. I think it's a great question. CACs aren't perfect, and I don't have a clear answer. There we go.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Sean also for her work, and to comment specifically on a couple CACs. At the Weber Natural Filtration Pool on the extreme north edge of Minneapolis, there was a CAC that supposedly said that the community, which happens to be in large part people of color community, had specifically requested a natural filtration pool. Well, that's baloney. Nobody knew. Did you guys know what a natural filtration pool is? Nobody knew. Now we're getting close to $9 million on that baby. That $9 million would be then a lot better spent on real equity. And as far as Hiawatha, the CAC there, as Sean just pointed out, is not very representative of the people in that neighborhood. And there's a racial component to the Hiawatha golf course also. People put it as a debate between environmental and golf. Like golfers are all big, rich white guys. And it turns out that when Minneapolis was the most anti-Semitic city in the USA in the 30s, before World War II, Joe Louis, the brown bomber, was hitting golf balls at Hiawatha Golf Course. They had the copper cup, the bronze tourney, and it's still important to the black golfing community. But that doesn't get heard on the citizen advisory committees. I've seen them. They get loaded up with insiders, and they have a survey there at the counter, and I don't know if they took my survey.
It's not transparent.
It's not transparent.
It's not, there's no minutes, you know, it's not transparent.
And so, sorry, Joelle, I just think that you sound a little bit too much pro-CAC, and Jake is a little more skeptical. I'm in the skeptic category.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I'm pro-CAC when they're done right. I'm not, can you hear me? No. I'm pro-CAC when they're done right. I am not pro-CAC that says we want golfers and then advertises in the hunting magazine, right? So I think that they can be one effective tool for getting community engagement. They're not the only effective tool, and I think that it takes a lot of voices, and if there's a better way, by all means, you need to suggest it, because what I do know is that, right or wrong, the park board has been pretty responsive in trying to try new things, right? And to work with other organizations who have new ways of doing things. Somewhat recent, but a lot of good stuff happening.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I just got to go on the record to say that has not been our experience. The park board has been very hostile to our organizing efforts. That's not the recent experience. It's not all bad. But the first time we sat down with Jane Miller, she got up and walked out of a meeting. And it's not just Jane Miller, you know, we've had a lot of those incidents. So there's a lot of positives too, and a lot of great people who are working real hard in there, so I don't mean to paint it all bad. But there's definitely been some hostile reactions to our organizing work.
Well, I don't know anything about the CAPS, but is there any kind of criteria for who can be a member? It seems like there should be some citizen or community representatives required.
That information is on the website, and so I think you can get, you know, that kind of thing. And here's the deal, guys. People are people, right? We all know that it's not going to be perfect, but we come back to the table the next day and we got to start over and get it right. I mean, that's the reality of it. None of us are going to get out of here without making a mistake, except for me, of course, because you know. But I just think that's important to say. And so go and find out about the different ways, and I'm not even going to say CACs, because for me, the most important piece of that, or kernel of that, is find out ways to get involved. Find out ways to get your voice heard, and find out ways to grab other people who are traditionally underrepresented and get them into those meetings so that their voices can be heard. Yes.
In response to the CACs, yes, staff has been evolving the CAC situation, and there is a percentage that the actual staff will choose whoever applies. And so it's a matter of not just culling favor with your whatever, whether it happens to be a commissioner, whether it happens to be a particular organization. You can apply independently, and the staff will vet those. So there's a broader amount of people that are being selected by staff.
Yeah, Joan Nemec. I worked for the Minneapolis Park Board from 1998 to 2001, and I was head of community planning. And when there are neighborhood parks, it's whoever shows up for a certain percentage of the meeting gets to vote. But if it's a regional park, for example, I was in charge of dog parks. Everybody wants a dog park, but not in their neighborhood. And so when we had the meeting at Nokomis, we had the master gardeners and the dirt bike people who were there, and they didn't want any, you know, any disruption in their area. So there are criteria for the regional parks that you have representation of those groups that are users. And there have been, at least in the past, there was public notification to try to get as much involvement and diversity as possible.
I'd like to ask a question about budgets. A few years ago, the park board budget was basically impossible to figure out. There were hidden budgets, hidden agendas, hidden plans with their own pot of funding. The regular budget was in chaos. They had this huge deficit, and thanks to past board chair Liz Walensky, who's not running again, she basically straightened it out. But have you seen any types of racial inequities in the funding and in the budgets that are allotted to parks and services in particular parts of the city?
Past or present?
Well, present, because you know they've got this huge deficit, so they're coming now for a referendum.
Right. So there is a difference between intent and impact, and I think that is really important to understand. And while I don't necessarily think in maybe the last 15 years the intent was to be discriminatory, the impact was absolutely that. And so now there have been measures taken to reallocate the budget in a way that has a base budget and then some additional criteria that are racially and culturally sensitive that would allow for additional funds to try to undo this long-term kind of systemic problem that we have of not necessarily investing in racially concentrated and economically desperate communities. So I think that effort is being made, and
we'll see how it goes, right? And it's going to take another few years to see the impact of that as well.
Could I say something to that, actually? Sure. Just to be clear, the referendum is no longer on the table. That there's the 20-year park plan is an agreement between the city and the park board that's being allocated using these racial equity metrics, but that only applies to the capital investment plan of the park board. So there's the recreation budget, there's the contracted budget, there's the forestry budget, there's the police department budget, all of which are very hard for everyday average people to read. And need to be treated with a racial equity lens, just like that capital investment budget. So there's a lot of work to be done on the budget, and that'll be all this next 4 years, a big push focusing on those budgets. I don't know if folks in this room are familiar with the participatory budgeting movement that's happening in municipalities across the country, where folks are figuring out ways to democratize budgeting for municipal government structures. That's something that we're interested in maybe linking up with. I'm not an expert, but I just to acknowledge the budget is still an issue, but these racial equity metrics are a beautiful step forward from our perspective.
Okay, thank you. Give someone who hasn't gone. Yeah.
Can you speak to youth programming and equity in our parks, and perhaps maybe describe a little bit the new schools and parks partnership moving forward in the parks and how that will address equity?
Okay. Do you want to start? No.
I can start, yeah, and I'm frustrated to say I know more than I'll be able to articulate off the top of my head right now. We've been organizing inside of the RecQuest CAC. The RecQuest Community Advisory Committee is kind of wrapping up, and that's the body that's been deciding the 20-year master plan for all the recreation. So the Neighborhood Park 2020 plan is specifically addressing physical capital, physical improvements in the park. The RecQuest is the adjoining process that will address recreation in a big scope of things for 20 years. And what I've seen come out of that process is a consensus around the table that there needs to be massive investment in recreation. There's no free child age programs in North Minneapolis. The park board is the largest provider of out-of-school time childcare, but it's still a cost burden for a lot of working class people. What we've heard over and over is that we really need free and affordable programs in the parks. Youth Line, could use a lot of investment. That's the teen program. So across the board, right now, it's pretty much a fee-based mentality to childcare programs. So that's something that we really want to look at. That's going to be a priority for us, is mobilizing around how do we increase investment in recreation. The MOU, I don't know too much about it. The one thing I can speak on is that I think collaboration is great between the schools and the park board. It's absolutely necessary. And this idea of creating like a sports, I came up playing sports and we were always at a disadvantage to the suburbs because they had like coordination. The kids played together all the way. But for us, we played in our little neighborhood parks, and then if you were any good, you moved to the suburbs or you went to De La Salle. So the idea that they're gonna create like a pipeline between the city parks and the schools, I think is really positive. And it's about how people organize. If those coaches and those parents in the athletic programs are tuned into what's happening in the racial justice movement and these budgeting conversations, it's all about how we organize in that space, I think.
The only other thing I'll add to that is, all of us wish we could do all of this at the exact same time, but we can't. And I will tell you that we are in conversations right now with the new head of recreation looking at budget. And so those things are underway. They've already made some improvements. They've already started to reach out to different organizations so that there's something going on all the time. But I think that people will be very pleased as it goes forward. And again, will there be hiccups? Yeah. And will they fix them? Yeah. And so I think that that's how we have to keep going. Oh, hold on, because she hasn't said anything, and I'll come back to you. Yes.
Have you been trying to work with the neighborhood associations at all?
So my role there is, oh yes, sorry. Have we been trying to work with the neighborhood associations at all? And so my role there is not that part of it. My role there is on the strategic side. But part of that strategy absolutely has places for all of the different neighborhood associations to come in. So tangentially, I have done some of that work. and we've looked at strategies for involving people, because the truth is that, mistakes or not, the current leadership believes that these parks belong to the communities, and they do want to be representative of the communities that they serve. And they have to balance that with a limited number of dollars, a limited number of staff time, and the fact that it's not just racial equity. It's race and gender and differently abled and LGBTQ and all the whole bit, right? So we have to make sure that everybody gets at least some piece of the pie.
On our end, we have worked with some neighborhood associations. We have active relationships with the Bottineau Neighborhood Association, with the Cleveland Neighborhood Association over north, with the Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association. I have to say, though, that if you look at the dynamics of white supremacy, the neighborhood associations are overwhelmingly white. They overwhelmingly favor property owners. So it's an interesting space, right? There was an effort kind of amongst progressive activists to organize inside of neighborhood associations a few years back, and it created some change. Some boards are more diverse. So we take it neighborhood by neighborhood. We'd love to work with folks. It's just a matter of figuring out, are our people really in that space?
Enemies, friends.
Exactly. I seen one hand before. I don't know if there was somebody.
I think she's been waiting for a little bit.
Russ.
I just wanted to clarify because I'm park watch and I clarify a lot. On the budget question, I'm sure this will surprise many people here. The Minneapolis Park Board does not have park budgets. So if you wanted to compare for equity reasons or anything else per capita, they don't have that. It's a lot better than it was when I started, when they had like 3 budgets, one for each area of the city. This is like 15 years ago. They've got new software, they're working on time, keeping track of time. The biggest job the park board does, of course, is maintenance, because they own a lot of real estate. And you can imagine putting in a system to track all the maintenance by address. So I know they're working on it. I just, encourage you to encourage them to work on it, because I think it's very important when organizations have financial problems or political problems like with equity, to know where the money goes.
So we've talked a lot about equity, and one major component of equity are fair labor jobs, fair wage jobs, and we have very strong labor unions in our park system. This last winter, the park board signed an agreement with the Lopet Foundation and refused to look at the union job program that was put forward to manage the new agreement and the space at Theodore Wirth Park moving forward. In response to the park board's refusal to even hear the discussion around the labor unions, several people came to, lots of people, dozens, came to a meeting to protest. And the park board at that meeting, the commissioners had 3 women arrested. Subsequently, one of those women was a 16-year-old girl. Subsequently, the park board refused to drop charges when Commissioner Brad Bourne suggested that they should drop the charges. So this gal will live for her life with this on her record. I just wonder if either of you would be willing to speak to labor organizing at the parks and the Lopet agreement and the arrest of these women.
I'll say this, is we're pro-working class. We want to see, if you look at the dynamics of who has the temporary jobs in the park board, the part-time jobs, it's people of color, you know what I'm saying? It's a top-heavy organization, and it's more white staff on the top. I don't want to get deep into the weeds with the Lopet Foundation particulars, but it's a part of a larger trend of public bodies privatizing and working against unionized labor. So I know there's issues with unionized labor as far as racial justice is concerned, but the idea that you're going to strip people's working conditions and harm the collective bargaining power of working class people. I'll just speak for myself personally. I think that's wrong. I don't think that's right. And I think they should have looked at that agreement. When it comes to those young women, I know that young woman, you know, and I think it's a travesty. It should have never happened. I think it's a real good example of the status quo, defensiveness, can't handle a challenge. The idea that they resorted to the police is unbelievable to me. The police have killed people I love. You know what I'm saying? Like, really think about that. And I know that's true for that young woman. So honestly, I wanted to look away that whole time. It was like cringeworthy. It was not good. And hopefully we'll do better.
So, I also am not going to get into the weeds on the Lopet Foundation. I think that there are several sides to that. And I understand both sides. On, you know, the one hand, you certainly want to protect jobs, and I think that there are lots of ways to do that. But you also want to have community partnerships so that you can continue to get people who are utilizing not only that park, but getting other types of experiences. And truthfully, these may end up being union workers one day, we don't know, right? So there's a lot of sides to that. As far as the arrests, I was at that meeting, and it's always sad to see that. And as an African American, I really am very critical about seeing that kind of thing. However, I was sitting at that meeting. I saw how absolutely rude the audience was being. I saw how a 12-year-old boy who was part of the Lopet Foundation, who, you know, came to say he supported it, was booed and sneered at and called names. This is not the community that I want to live in. Okay, and I don't care who's doing that. Black, white, brown, whatever. That is not how I want to live. And those people that were arrested, my people, and be clear about that, okay? They were arrested, but they were warned 3 times that if you continue, we are going to have you removed. Because guess what? We still got to get work done at the park board. All of you guys are here because you care about getting work done. And we can't get work done if people are not following process. Everybody has a chance to speak. So when it's not your turn, allow the other person to speak. So for me, it's so sad. And it does make me want to cry in a lot of ways. But if that's what it takes for us to be civil to one another and give everybody a shot, even if we disagree, because I agreed with some of the things they were saying, I just didn't agree with the way that they were saying it. And I think that the park board police in that case did a very good job of being as respectful as possible in removing people from a situation. Because I've also seen police remove people in a situation where it was not respectful and it was not gentle. And they did that at that particular meeting. I think you got one more over there.
Okay, you can be the last question, but we have to, it's okay.
I will be here for discussion, as I'm sure the other candidates will be. And I hope some retiring commissioners will be too. I was at that same meeting September 7th, 2016, and as a union steward and an elected union representative, I'm an elected union officer. The union people, which included white, black, Latino, we were very respectful. We held our signs down. We did not boo any 12-year-old kids. I find that to be somewhat to ring false to my very explicit memories.
Not the union. It wasn't the union who was doing that.
But the speakers who were arguing or advocating against the Lopet were not attacking skiing, and they were not attacking the Lopet. They were attacking the idea that a nonprofit, which is the Minneapolis Park Board, needs to outsource jobs to a nonprofit, which is the Lopet, which, by the way, I can show you on my phone, advertised a mountain bike instructor job at $8.50 an hour. Now that's not a living wage. And I don't care what color you are. You try buying a house, getting a car, or taking a vacation, there's no benefits to go with that $8.50 an hour job. So I just disagree with your slant on that meeting.
I want to be clear in that none of the people that were arrested were part of the union. The union was very, very respectful in terms of the way that it protested. You guys had the shirts, you had the signs, people were very respectful. It was not the union that did that at that meeting. So be very clear when I say that.
Okay, with that, I'm going to close the question period. This has been an amazing conversation, and I thank you both so much for being here. And I do want us to take some time for some small group discussion at your tables, and if you can switch your chairs around to get maybe 6 to 8 people together to talk about what you heard tonight. If you could, was there something you learned that you didn't know, and what is it that you can do to continue this conversation?